Myth number one is this: parents will always make their school choice based on what's best for their children. Self-evident, isn't it? Is that a myth? The truth is, it's just not true. My own experience suggests this isn't always the case. When I studied for that MBA, my dissertation was about school choice, and I really got an understanding of why parents chose the schools they choose. The truth is, parents often, without knowing it, and that's important, without knowing it, make decisions based on the school that they would like their child to attend. How will it sound when they tell people? What will be the envious glances that they get when they put those school, where after the letter has come in, when they put it onto Facebook? They choose a school based on their own ambitions rather than what's best for their child. So remember, I said this is done without knowing, and often this is completely and entirely subconscious. It's not deliberate, it's just human nature. And this is a world and a culture that encourages a sense of, one-upmanship, if I can put it like that. So, can everyone in the room pause for a moment? Take your current school choice thoughts, put them in a box, and for the moment, throw them away, even if you go and pick that up later. Refocus again on your child, their personality, their mindset, their strengths, their weaknesses, their passions, their ambitions, and their own unique self. Place those uppermost in your mind as I'm talking today. Get rid of everything else. Get rid of all the clutter and all the noise. Choose the school based only on the things that you will find are supporting your child's education. And you may find, at the end of all of this, that your school choice preference that you currently have in your mind changes a little. So get creative, broaden those horizons. So how are you going to choose that school? Well, herein we find myth number two. League tables are a great way of ranking schools. I bet you've heard this many times, but it is a personal bugbear of mine. League tables simply don't. And it's amazing how often this is a parent's first point of reference. Indeed, the fact that league tables persist and exist is because parents and journalists and government genuinely think it's a good way of ranking schools. I can assure you it's not. At Wellington, one of my first acts was to take the school out of those newspaper league tables. So I did put my money where my mouth is. League tables are great for Wellington. Wellington always finishes at the top of them. But I didn't want people to judge Wellington on how it performed in a rank order of league tables. Because I can assure you there are some fantastic schools that are nowhere near the top of those tables. There are some surprisingly poor ones towards the top. So what do league tables do? Well, league tables give you a pretty good analysis of how selective a school is based on their entrance exam performance, or rather, how selective a school is able to be. And this means that league tables are a pretty good idea of the number of children that sat for a particular school, and so giving the opportunity for academic selectivity. And it gets worse, actually, because in some cases, league table position is based on how well individual schools are able to tailor what they do to maximize league table performance. Not all schools do this, some do. So ask schools questions. Are they really putting your child above where they finish in league tables? Ask them the question, do all children sit the GCSEs that they started to study? Ask them the question, how many children are not allowed back into the sixth form after they've sat their GCSEs, and what's the criteria for moving into the sixth form? Ask them how many students sit qualifications that don't appear in league table tallies. Ask how many children are withdrawn from exams in the year before exams are taken. How many subjects do the brightest children take? And if the answer is more than 10 or 11, ask why. The point is, make sure you select a school that puts your child at the very top of their decision-making process above league table performance. Remember that league tables don't tell you the standard of pastoral care, the commitment to developing the whole person, the standard of teaching. Yes, I mean that, the standard of teaching. The commitment to developing learners that can transfer their skills into the real world and not just be equipped with a single skill of passing examinations. And the opportunities that they have beyond the classroom. So look beyond that blunt instrument and get to know the school for what it is. Now, this time last year, I was here and I was giving an entire speech based on how to choose a school and what to look for. So that's a speech for another time. But do look beyond that blunt instrument of league tables. I could go on here, but I won't for the moment. Otherwise, we won't get through everything. Myth number 3. You need to have your child extensively tutored. I sort of toyed with the idea of asking you to put your hands up if you were having your children tutored. And I decided not to, because I've done that before in another school. I'll tell you what happened in a moment. But tutoring, particularly in London, has now reached epic proportions. And it's a snowball effect. One parent hears that another parent is having their child tutored. They think, oh my goodness, my child's at a disadvantage to that child. They then tell another parent that their child's being tutored, and the same thing goes on and on and on, and it's a snowball effect. That's what happens. I've lost count of the number of people that I've spoken to who point to that being the reason why they're having their child tutored, because everyone else is doing it. So I want you to be bold. I want you to please stand against that and don't have your child extensively tutored. I'll come back to that word extensively. Don't make your child's childhood memories a memory of working hard at school, coming home, meeting their tutor, and carrying on working hard, and then going through endless practice papers and so on. Don't spoil those precious times of childhood, because I've got good news. Believe it or not, your children will be more attractive and more likely to get into those independent schools if they haven't been extensively tutored, and I'll tell you why. So I asked at a London prep school, not so very long ago, to put their hands up if their son or their daughter was receiving tutoring. And do you know what? Nobody put their hands up. So I couldn't believe it. So clearly, the tutoring industry in London is doing really badly at the moment. So then I said to them, okay, right, I'm not going to leave here until you tell me the truth, and perhaps just to get rid of me. But then we waited a few moments. I asked the question again, and everybody put their hand up. Now, what really scares me about saying that is now many of you are thinking, if they're all having their child tutored, I better have my child tutored. And so it goes on, and so it goes on. But even if, and it is a big if, you do manage to coach your child to within an inch of their life and find their way into a particular school, just managing to get in, that could be the worst thing of all, because you might find that your child has a bright future behind them. A child who scrapes into a school that has a standard of entry that's way beyond their true academic ability is not a great place to be. It's not a great place for a child to flourish. And ask every head teacher here, and they will tell you the same thing. It's one thing I think I can say we would all agree on. And the law of diminishing returns applies. Children who are tutored at the expense of everything else, they're less likely to get in. Their lack of enthusiasm for academic study comes across loud and clear. So if you really want to prepare your child, here are some tips. Encourage them to read for pleasure. Go to galleries. On every holiday you go on, try to do one thing that's a little bit more cultural than sitting around the pool or lying on the beach. Do those sorts of things. Watch the news. Talk about it afterwards. Watch documentaries. Talk about those. The basic premise here is that developing your child as a person will give them a much stronger chance of getting them into the school you finally decide upon. And they'll enjoy it much more as well. At that London prep school that I told you about, one person put their hand up and said, could you repeat all those things again? And wanted to write a list of the things that I'd said. But that's not the point. That's not what I'm trying to say. There's no menu to do this. It'll be different for all of you. different for every child. It's got to be assimilated into their everyday lives. And all that time that's spent on tutoring can be put to brilliant use. When they arrive at their interview, and we'll come to the interviews in a moment, they'll be much better prepared. And they will give off all of the signals of interest and passion and enthusiasm that schools are looking for. So to be clear, I'm actually not against a small amount of targeted tutoring. There will always be areas that your child hasn't picked up first time round, areas of concern. But use tutoring wisely. Work with the school to identify specific gaps in their knowledge and then work on those in a way that's proportionate and likely to have benefits. And similarly, I'm not against a small amount of practice on those multiple choice papers that many schools set, the Maths, English, VR and NVR, whether it's set by Chem or by the ISEB and others. Essentially, I do think that there is merit to taking a small number of those tests, maybe a maximum of 4, to familiarise your child with the sorts of things they'll be coming across. But after 3 or 4 of those tests, once they're getting their timings right and they're familiar with what's going on, the law of diminishing returns, which I've just said, starts to apply again. And test fatigue sets in. Myth number 4. There is a way to do a good interview. There is a way to do a good interview. A set template. It genuinely saddens me how much time schools, and I have to say particularly prep schools, spend on interview preparation. Truth is, after many, many, many interviews, we are really good at spotting a coached child. This is how it goes. Remember, we're dealing with a 10-year-old here. As I approach said 10-year-old looks at me with laser focus into my eyes, seeing into my very soul, because they have been told, whatever you do, make eye contact. The next thing that happens is I will go to shake their hand. They will take me in a vice-like grip as they are told to give a firm handshake. If any school ever has put a black mark against a 10-year-old with a weak handshake and lack of eye contact, that is not a school you want your child to be going to. Those things do not matter at all. The next thing that will happen is I will say to them something like, "How did you get here today?" And they'll say, "I went to Knossos this year in Crete. It was absolutely amazing. I'm so interested in the background to ancient Greece." Okay, right. And children don't understand subtlety and nuance. So when you say to them as they leave the house, "Don't forget to mention that dinosaur fossil," they will walk into the interview room and go, "I've got a dinosaur fossil at home. It's 56 million years old." That happens all the time. And then there are other things that happen. You spot very clearly coached answer. And as soon as you're chatting with a child in one of these circumstances, what you do is you realize straight away that they are doing something from memory. So you try and take them straight off the point and onto something else. And when you do that, more than once, in fact, many occasions, the child's looked me in the eye and said, "But I haven't finished my answer yet." And there are stories of directors of admissions who say to children, "How did that interview go?" And they say, "Well, none of my questions came up." And so you can speak to many people, and they'll all tell you similar things. But trust the schools, okay? They've got years of experience in this. They know what they're looking for, and they will endeavor to move immediately beyond anything that seems obviously coached. No school expects a 10-year-old or an 11-year-old or a 9-year-old, whatever it is, to arrive at the interview like an apprentice candidate. Thank goodness. So what they're really looking for is passion and excitement. They're looking for depth, and that won't come with coached answers. They're looking for the ability to sustain an argument, to perhaps have some new ideas, even if they're crazy and wacky and outlandish, and be able to develop them in a discussion. For schools with a particular academic focus, and there are some of those around, and they will be very open and honest about this. Many independent schools do have a very particular academic focus. There's nothing wrong with that, but they will be looking particularly for an interest around academic pursuits. Now, if you're thinking that your child isn't necessarily genuinely excited about academic pursuits and can't talk about those in too much depth, then find a school that really does value their rounded nature. There are many of those too. And at those schools, what they are looking for is passion and depth and interest about something. It really could be anything. I've had some of the most brilliant, fascinating, exciting, enjoyable chats around some of the most outlandish things you care to mention. And they're great. We love those. We absolutely love those. So when they're bringing in that object to show an interviewer, do you remember, lots of schools do ask you to bring an object in. Far, far better to bring in an object that your child, your son or daughter is really excited about and can talk with a glint in their eye and can go beyond anything that might come up, any of the questions, and be able to answer them and expand them. That's much better than bringing in a certificate, second prize in the poetry reading competition, because it won't be something that gets them excited and alive. So that would be another piece of advice. So a few extra tips. Those interests, they should be genuine. If a child arrives at an interview and says they enjoy and were inspired by To Kill a Mockingbird, brilliant. That's amazing. But that will be a door that the interviewer will want to open and go through. So if it stops there, then actually that's more of a negative than a positive, because it really means that they're not excited and inspired by that. If your son or your daughter enjoys a particular author, then do talk to them about those authors, and do make sure that it's not just one book read a year ago, but actually an ongoing interest. Because interviewers at independent schools love to hear about it. And on the day of the assessment, when they go in, many schools have a long assessment day, but they try to make it fun. And what they're doing is they're trying to just get to know every child. And so don't think that you have to be the loudest or the most gregarious. The reason they have those longer days now is because they really want to understand what's making your child tick. They do need to try to engage in the day and try to say something, but they don't have to be making contributions all the time without thought. A few interesting, thoughtful, and insightful contributions will really, really work. Those days are really insightful for the people who are watching. A 10-year-old or an 11-year-old can rarely keep up a pretense for an entire day. And so it does help to really understand children at those days. And it gives an idea of their underlying characteristics, how supportive, how kind, and other things as well. So let's go on to the last of those two myths. So if you're someone who is being given extensive coaching and interview practice, think very carefully about those two things operating together. You're giving your child interview practice and coaching, and what message is that surreptitiously giving to your kids? Children have a default setting. Their life is pretty great. It's the time of their lives. They're happy. The default is everything is good. But interviews aren't something to be feared as far as they're concerned. However, they are sponges. They will feed off your anxiety and the school's anxiety. You may think you're not showing your fears, but they will pick up on any underlying anxiety. So having them coached and giving them lots of interview practice, those conversations that you're having in the kitchen that they overhear and so on, they will give off this impression that you are nervous about the process, and they are terribly fearful of letting you down. So keep everything light and keep it upbeat. They will perform better, I promise you. And remember that going to the school that you have finally selected as your first choice or not getting in doesn't necessarily mean it's the end of the world, I promise. So don't let them think it is. keep everything upbeat, and try not to let them feed off your anxieties. And again, the good news is they will perform better as a result. My last myth, you'll be pleased to know, myth number 5. You need to enter lots of schools just in case. I have seen many children out on their feet by the time they get to the 6th or the 7th or the 9th or the 11th school that they have been entered for. They're simply not capable of performing to their very best again and again and again. And so there is another law of diminishing returns right here too. I reckon that kids are just about capable of being able to keep right excited and interested and giving of their best at about 3 schools. That would be my view. Others may disagree. But I would advise you to think really carefully about your list. Take your time by all means. You can have lots and lots of schools that you think might be right and you're looking at them. Find out about them, progressively whittle them down to about 3. Then what you're saying to your children is these are the ones that we think would be right for you, and they can give it of their best at each of those.